Okay, moving into our last section, talking about the internal factors for regulation of sexual behavior. So one of those internal factors, right, internal things that help us make that decision of whether or not to be sexually active at that time with that person is if we feel attracted to that person, right? And so these are factors about that person that we find attractive. So attractiveness, there's lots of things that go into that, right? Their gender, their physical appearance, their physique, their bearing, right? Kind of their posture, the way they move through the world, certainly their personality and style. Relationship can be important, right? So some people only want to be sexually intimate with someone that they're in love with, that they have a long-term committed relationship with. And some people want the exact opposite, right? They want somebody they've never met before and they're never going to see again. So, relationship can go lots of different ways. Smell is really interesting, and some of smell is actually what we would perceive as odor and smell. And some of it, in terms of like pheromones, are things that don't really register on a conscious level. And they're really interesting. We'll talk about those more in a second. And so what I want to say about this is that some of these factors are innate. You're just born with it. These are just people that you find attractive. But there's also a significant learned component to this. We are social animals and we are very smart and we can be trained quite well. So you can also kind of be trained to find certain things as attractive or unattractive. All right, so smell is really interesting. So we all have our own personal body odor, right? Dogs love to investigate and see what your particular smell is. And in large part, that's secreted by our sweat glands, right? And some of it we can actually smell, but some of it is pheromones. And these are chemicals that our brain is able to detect based on these molecules that come in through our nose, but we don't perceive them consciously, right? So we have this kind of unique signature of both odors and pheromones that are really distinct fingerprints to who we are. They're really specific to us. And so what's interesting about that is that studies show that in general, so when they did studies on female-bodied people, and they would have these guys shower with unscented soap and then not put any deodorant on and then wear a t-shirt for a day. And then they would give these shirts to women to smell and say how much they liked that smell, right? And how much maybe it kind of turned them on or was attractive to them. And what's interesting is that they found that people liked the smells of shirts of men who were somewhat different but not too different from them. Now, what do I mean by that in terms of different but not different? So it has to do with these genes that are really important for immune function. And these are genes that we also look at if we're seeing if somebody is a match for an organ transplant, right? So it's kind of a marker of how genetically related someone is to you. And what's interesting is that they tended to prefer the shirts of people who were in the mid-range, like not really similar to them, which is probably a good thing because maybe that would have been, a little incestuous, a little inbreeding, but not too different, right? Because if somebody's very, very different, maybe there's something wrong, or maybe they're from a very foreign tribe or something. Who knows, right? But so it's really interesting. This, might have an evolutionary advantage because inbreeding doesn't work well. But it's men don't seem to be as sensitive to this. It seems to be the female-bodied people who are choosier in this way. And there's a little bit of correlation that they find too between this and miscarriages as well as like marital discord. So the people who kind of got it just right tend to have happier marriages, it seems. So kind of interesting when you think about it. And then that explains why, like, I don't know, Andy Bresnahan, right? I don't know what, like, I don't even like him, but I liked him, right? So like sometimes when there's somebody that you're just like, oh, why am I so attracted to that person? Sometimes it's probably the way they smell. Right. Then there's desire. So this is different than attractiveness, right? Attractiveness is about whether that particular person is attractive to you, whether they turn you on. But then desire is your own internal, like, what do you guys call it? Oh, how thirsty you are, right? And so there's a lot of factors that go into that. One is just your own libido. Some people just have a really high sex drive. Some people have a lower sex drive. There are also stimuli in the environment, right? The mood lighting, the music, right? All those kinds of romantic or sexy things can impact desire. Certainly your personal feelings about sexuality are really important. If you feel like it is sinful or it's forbidden or it's shameful, then you're less likely to feel a lot of desire, right? Or if you do, it's going to be really complicated and difficult. Also, your sense of self and self-esteem are really important. If you're thinking about getting naked or partially naked with someone or sharing your body with someone, that's a pretty vulnerable and intimate space. So you have to be feeling good about your body and feeling good about yourself in general to feel really sexy. Emotional relationship, again, some people love is a huge aphrodisiac, right? And for some people, a stranger is a huge aphrodisiac. Certainly alcohol and other drugs affect desire, right? They lower our inhibitions. They make us more willing to be risky, more willing to engage in behaviors that might be kind of scary or taboo or forbidden to us. So alcohol, absolutely, as the social lubricant, certainly can impact desire. If you have too much alcohol, then of course it creates all kinds of problems. And I just want to make a point here. If someone is drunk, they are unable to give consent. Okay, they are not legally capable of giving consent. So do not have sex with someone who is drunk, right? They cannot give consent. All right. And then hormonal state. So interestingly, you've learned about all the different hormonal shifts that happen through the menstrual cycle. Usually around the time of ovulation, with that increase in estrogen, female body people will often feel very sexy during that time. Now you might be like, oh, I know somebody who feels really sexy when they're on their period. Well, if you think about it, in the days leading up to the period, hormone levels are pretty high there also. And there's also something else that happens when you have your period, which is that the risk of getting pregnant is very low. And so that can remove some fear from the equation. So fear is the other final factor, right? So fear of getting pregnant can certainly impact your interest in being sexy with someone. Fear of getting an infection, right? So these cats, but I love you, baby. Fleas, Samuel, you gave me fleas, right? So that impacts our decision making. And then also fear of like getting caught, right? Fear of your roommate walking in on you, fear of your parents walking in on you, fear of the police officer knocking on your car window if you've been parked someplace, or fear that your best friend is going to find out that you slept with that guy that you whatever, who's your ex or whatever it might be. So fear also plays a role. So altogether, right, our decisions about sexual behaviors are really complicated, right? So you have these kind of innate drives and possibilities, right? So you have these innate desires, things that you find attractive, body parts that you have that you could potentially do things with. And then you have all these kind of social and cultural ideas and scripts that some of which are kind of codified and formalized as laws or religious rules, but some of them are kind of more informal through media and family and other relationships, right? So you have this, like, you start with kind of what you feel like you want to do, and then you have like what you think you should or shouldn't do, and then what your community, whether that be your friends or your religion or whatever, thinks you should do, and then finally what laws tell you to do. Which hopefully for most of us is not a huge part of the decision-making process. Hopefully you're not coming up against that too much. All right, so all of these things go together into deciding where and when and how we engage in, with whom we engage in sexual activities. So it's really complicated. And in the next lecture, lecture 13, we'll talk about actual sexual function, so what's happening physiologically in the body during the sexual response cycle, as well as a few of the common disorders with sexual function.